Welcome to Management 1100. We're going to be covering Chapter 14 in our Kinicki textbook. Chapter 14 discusses power, influence, and leadership, how you go from becoming a manager to a leader. And this is a huge chapter, so make sure that you take really good notes. So let's dive in, shall we? So there's some questions that you should be able to answer by the time you're done reading chapter 14. You don't want to just be a manager, you want to be a leader. What's the difference between the two? You should be able to define the difference between the two. What does it take to be a successful leader? And do you behave in similar ways as other leaders? And, you'll see this word effective. And I'm a stickler for effective. I'm a stickler for the way it's used, because an effective leader does not necessarily mean a great leader. Hitler was an effective leader, right? Now, mind you, he did not succeed at his ultimate goal. He did not achieve it, but he achieved a lot, and he was able to lead a lot of people to do a lot of bad, horrible things. So he was very effective. This word is used so much throughout management and leadership text that it just kind of like rubs me the wrong ways, because the message is implied that being an effective leader means that you're a great leader, and great and in positive. And you can be very effective and just be, yeah. So hopefully that makes sense. So I just don't want there to be a correlation between effective and great or good or positive. All right. Effective meaning that you're accomplished and you're able to get people to follow and to execute the plans and challenges that you create. Some other questions you should be able to answer are: how might effective leadership vary according to the situation at hand? What does it take to truly inspire people to perform well beyond their normal levels, where they're not just doing average, but they're actually reaching towards excellence? If there are any, are there many ways to be a leader, and which one would describe you best? So when we jump into the nature of leadership, it's your ability to influence employees, to influence other people, to influence community members, to influence your family members, to voluntarily pursue goals, dreams, a mission, some kind of gains. And it's not just organizationally, but within any type of group setting. Table 14.1 shows you there's a characteristics of leaders and managers, and you'll see that a manager can be manage resources, execute plans, and deliver goods and services. A leader is, visionary. They act decisively. They're inspirational, charismatic. They manage people, put people first, responding to and acting for followers, while the manager is most likely putting the customer first, responding to and acting on behalf of the customers. Hence why you sometimes have managers who have not so great relationships with their employees, because they always say the customer is always right. And so no matter what the employee says, the employee ends up being punished for whatever. There's some kind of repercussion for their behavior, or they didn't do something based on what a customer said. And a great leader will turn to their people first and give them the benefit of the doubt and see how best to look out for that employee. Because what if the customer is actually wrong? And you've now penalized, you've punished, you've chastised, you've embarrassed, you've humiliated an employee who did nothing wrong. So it's just those things. And it's not to say that all managers do that. There are some managers that are great leaders and will always make sure that both their employees and their customers are able to save face and maintain a sense of dignity. So you have to be able to cope with complexity, being a great manager, determining what needs to be done, and it's about planning and budgeting and creating various arrangements so that you're able to organize and staff your group so that you can reach a goal, so that you can accomplish an agenda, and it's making sure that people do their job. So that's about controlling and problem solving. And so we're going to talk about and we've talked about before, the PLC model, which is, planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. And so these are the different elements that make up a manager's day-to-day. Now, to be a great leader, you have to determine what needs to be done and setting that direction. You're setting sail. You're making sure that ship is pointing in the right direction on the oceans, and you're creating an arrangement for how the people will go about accomplishing it. So you're pulling all of your people together, getting them all lined up, and your crew will have to work together to make sure that that ship stays on the charted course. And then ensuring that people do their jobs. You have to be able to motivate and inspire people. It's not just saying, here's the job at hand, get it done. It's motivating them to do it. It's inspiring them to do it and wanting to do it with a level of excellence, not mediocrity, not just being average, but they want to give it their all. And that's what a great leader is able to do. And the difference between a great leader and just being effective at what you do is whether or not you're coming with a place of fear or a place of love. And when I say a place of love, I'm not talking about romantic love. It's just a sense of respect and dignity, and understanding that there's a human being on the other side of that communication. There's a heart on the other side of the communication. That's someone's son or daughter that you're speaking to, that you're giving directives to. And so you can threaten someone, you can instill fear in them, and they will, of course, be motivated because they don't want to lose their job or be punished, but they won't necessarily be inspired. And it does not mean that you're going to actually get a level of excellence and care in that task that's being completed as you would if there was a sense of love and respect and trust that had been ingrained in your interaction with that employee. So there's 5 sources of power. The 3 that you see here, you have your legitimate power, reward power, coercive power. Legitimate just happens to be you have a formal position, you have the job title. That gives you legitimate power. Reward power is your ability to reward other people. If you have the authority to issue rewards, then you have reward power. If you can promote and demote or give bonuses or raises, you have reward power. Coercive power is your ability to punish. If you have the authority to punish, to terminate, to demote me, that's coercive power, right? Then let's go to the other 2. We have expert power and referent power. Expert means that you have expertise in a certain area. You have specialized information. And with that, people automatically give you credence. They immediately give you a level of respect because they said, wow, this person is an expert in this field. They are a specialist in this field. This is their sweet spot. They just get it. That's expert power, right? You can have a person who is a biochemist, right? You're not going to question much what they say about that industry, that field, because they have multiple degrees in it. So they have expert power. Referent power is derived from one's personal attraction. Usually it is the ability to inspire, to engage, to people just look up to that person. It's usually you have a lot of church leaders, religious leaders, politicians have referent power. You have, President Obama, you have, Jesus Christ, the Dalai Lama. That's referent power, right? People are naturally drawn to them in their presence. So Alex compliments his coworker Joe on the great job he did on a weekly report, and he also informs their boss. Alex is using which of the four sources of power: legitimate, referent, reward, or punishment? Compliments Joe. He then tells their boss that Joe did a great job. Which of those four power structures is Alex utilizing? If you said C, reward, you're correct. Right. So, here's some tactics that you can use to influence others: rational persuasion, ingratiating tactics, personal appeals, legitimating tactics, pressure tactics, consultation, coalition. The ability to get others to follow your wishes is influence, right? And so you have 9 ways to try to influence other people. And the rational persuasion, that's where you convince someone by using facts, logic, inspirational appeals. I mean, that's kind of self-explanatory. And so the coalition tactics, that's where you actually get people to join your bandwagon, right? You form these groups, and then those groups help to work on your behalf. Pressure tactics, that can be as extreme as bullying, but it could just be a nagging. It can be just a micromanaging, right? There's a lot of different ways. Personal appeals is you one-on-one connecting with a person, seeing where you have some shared interest, where there's a common ground between the two of you, things of that nature. You can also have a personal relationship, a friendship, so on and so forth. So the 5 approaches to leadership, table 14.2, you have your trait, behavioral, situational, transformational leadership, and then there's leader, e-leader, and followers, the perspectives, the 3 additional perspectives. But the 4 approaches that you see, and then of course the 3 additional perspectives, what makes it 5. Under trait approaches, you have your leadership traits, which is a positive task-oriented traits, and you have that positive, negative, interpersonal attributes. Under behavioral approaches, you can have a kind of passive behavior. This, okay, it gets done when it gets done, and la-di-da. Situational approach, we have a Fielder's contingency model where it's very task-oriented. There's a relationship-oriented style, and then there's 3 dimensions of control where you have the leader member, the task structure, and the position power. Read deeply into that because you may see that on a quiz or exam. The 4th approach is the transformational leadership approach. And that's where you really get employees to pursue various goals within the organization. And they're so focused on pursuing those goals, they will they'll put their self-interest to the side. So is using a lot of inspirational motivation, individualized consideration. You're stimulating them intellectually, right? You're getting the wheels turning in their mind where they are just so excited about the work being done, the project, the task at hand, that they feed off of it. And then the 5th approach, which combines 3 different perspectives, which is the leader-member exchange. And you have different sorts of relationships with different employees that are that report to you. And And we all do. We don't have the same kind of interactions, the same kind of relationships with each person that reports to us. As well, we don't have the same relationship to people that we report up to. Everyone's relationships are different, and so you have to be able to consider that exchange. E-leadership is where you're using IT to do any kind of one-on-one or group interactions. This format could be e-leadership, right? Where we're interacting, but we could be able to use the portal within Blackboard in order to do some Q&A and some other follow-up and any kind of tutoring that would be necessary. Then, of course, followers are the role between followers in the leadership process. That's the perspective, making sure that you're always looking through their lens. So are there any distinctive personality characteristics? That's what the trait approach looks at, is it tries to identify distinct characteristics that effective leaders possess. And there's some positive attributes, which, you're an extrovert, you're really out there, you're outgoing, you're agreeable to change, to allowing people to try things, allowing people to be innovative, allow people to bring you ideas. Your communication skills. Those people who are really good leaders have really good communication skills. Some negative attributes is you do have a lot of narcissists out there. You have a lot of people out there who think it's all about them, and you're just on board because they allow you to be on board. That they really run the show, and you're just a placeholder. You're just there. You're just taking up space, but they're really doing all the work. The Machiavellianism and psychopathy. So these are extremes, of course. And you see this a lot in a lot of our negative leaders. If you look around political leaders around the world, you can see a lot of these characteristics. Yeah. All right. So let's look a little bit closer to our Machiavellianism. That's where it's this really cynical view of human nature. And so that person will condone unethical ways. They'll manipulate people. They'll get people to manipulate people. They're about putting results over principles. So they will be gung-ho for anything that's unethical. If it breaks the rules, they don't care, as long as at the end of the day, you get the job done, you get the results, that client is happy, you close the deal, you were able to secure that $1 million check. That is their sole purpose. But the psychopathy is the total lack of concern for others. You have no empathy. You're a psychopath. You don't care that you hurt anyone else. You're very impulsive. You are rarely, if ever, remorseful. You can hurt someone and you'll find a way to blame them for getting hurt. It was their fault, so on and so forth. You could possibly see someone in physical pain and you would not feel or show any kind of remorse. And we have definitely had our share of psychopaths throughout history in leadership positions. Now, do women possess traits that make them better leaders than men? And there's some studies that show that women executives actually score higher than men on a various level of measures, from producing high quality work to goal setting to being able to mentor employees. I'm sure that some people would beg to differ, but there have been studies that show it. And it just may be a difference between, the nurture versus nature, or a combination of the both. It could be the fact in how we're raised through our childhoods. And if you look at the quality of work, this a detail-oriented nature, and usually in classrooms K through 12, we actually seem to nurture that more in our girls than we do our boys. The same with goal setting. Girls are usually more inclined and more nurtured to focus on goals, on what they want to be, while boys are allowed to be free to go where the wind takes them. Changing up. I don't know where I want to be in 5 years. Where you'll find most young girls who grow into women who know that, who have this 5, 10, 20 year plan that they want to achieve. Not to say that males, their male counterparts don't. It's just you see this ingrained more in females. And then the mentoring. You see that more women or females have been nurtured to be empathetic, to cheerlead for each other, to rally around someone, to sit back and really be concerned and deeply committed to resolution and to being helpful and giving directions and things of that nature. And so you can see how that can be nurtured throughout someone's childhood into adulthood. And if it's been the image and the process for so long, you can see how it can carry all the way through into your executive life in business. But once again, it's not to say that men do not possess these qualities and these traits. So there's a lack of women at the top, right? And people always want to know why. Why are there not more female CEOs? Why are there not enough, women running the show? Why are there not enough, why don't we have a female president? All these kind of things that come up. And some people think that it's an unwillingness to compete or to sacrifice. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes, because once again, as I mentioned about how you were nurtured as a child, girls are oftentimes not encouraged to be competitive. And girls are often taught to put family before career. It is only the smart, wise, forward-thinking family who encourages their daughter as well as their sons to be competitive and to sacrifice something. Sometimes you sacrifice in the short term so that you can have gains in the long term. So this is one major reason when women have to contemplate, starting a family versus making their way up the corporate ladder. Some women may not necessarily want to sacrifice their fertility in order to achieve a career goal. Modesty is another reason why you will find that some women can be more modest than men. A lack of a mentor, and I would wholeheartedly put stars around this. As I have said when I've done various speaking engagements and sat on different panels, things of that nature, that women it's just a default. We are great cheerleaders for each other. What I mean by that is someone can say that they have a goal, they want to achieve, they want to do this, whatever. And we're like, yes, you go, girl. You can do it. Woo-hoo! Yeah. I'm so proud of you. Let me know when you've done it. Woo-hoo! That is a cheerleader. And men, the male counterparts, have not only what I would call mentors, but you have sponsors. So when a guy says, I want to become partner at XYZ law firm, and he tells someone else, that guy goes through his mental Rolodex, he goes through his contact list, and he sees who he knows that could possibly get him to the table, right? He helps open doors of opportunity. If you ever want to see the male versus female dynamic in any kind of setting, whether it's business or social, see what happens when you put a group of women in a room, a group of men in the room, and see how the relationships are formed. See how there's interaction. Women oftentimes will connect, will laugh, will leave that event. It could be a dinner, it could be a business event. We'll leave that event and not necessarily actually exchange contact information with other women. The vast majority of times, men do. Once again, this is social conditioning. Boys grew up playing on the playground. They're going to be friends, blah, blah, blah. They're going to hang out after school. They're going to still, and every time a male then enters a playground, a gymnasium, throw a rock at them. Not a physical rock, I mean the basketball. And they'll get on a court, and in no time, they're talking to the other guys. They're exchanging numbers, meet you up at the gym, so on, so on, and so forth. And it's just this dynamic that naturally happens. Well, that is what happens. Men immediately get into the framework of, how can I be of best service to you? What can I do to help that person? It's a mentor. They guide them through the process. And that's the reason why you'll see men who, as they're going up that corporate ladder, that there's usually a circle of other men who have helped lead them along that way. And you don't necessarily see that in the relationship, the dynamics with women. There's, sometimes we're not in a position, or we don't realize we're in a position of influence to be able to sponsor someone, to open the door for someone. And sometimes we also are a little apprehensive to do so because, how will it be perceived? We got extra woman on in here. Will the guys feel, we start doing that. It's no different than when you look at the racial components. When you look at the number of African Americans who serve as mentors to other African Americans, what is very interesting is when you see some of the most powerful Black men and women in just the U.S. alone, a lot of times when you look at the list of mentors that helped pave the way for them or open the door for them, it's interesting that you may not necessarily see that many African Americans, because sometimes we have an apprehension that if there's too many of us in the room, that others will feel intimidated, will feel threatened, will feel insecure, will not feel comfortable with it. And so sometimes that happens with the dynamic interchange with women. So that lack of a mentor can be very, very key to why you don't see enough women at the top, enough women serving on paid corporate boards, things of that nature. And then finally, starting out lower, and so you're more likely to quit. When you are actually qualified to come in on a certain level, or you come in entry level with your male counterpart, but for whatever reason he gets promoted a lot faster than you, and he's getting paid more than you. You may be more qualified. You may actually know the information more so than him, but for whatever reason, you're brought in lower, you're paid lower. You can burn out faster. And so you're more likely to quit before you even can get up that ladder to reach the top. So there's a lot of, although you see there's these 4 categories, they're so very weighted. It's so very intense. And it's something that women leaders were having more discussions about, where we are really trying to find a way to unravel this narrative for women in business so that we can be more competitive, more visible, and be able to open more doors of opportunity for other women. So let's look at some behavioral approaches. When we look at behavioral leadership, that's where you attempt to determine the distinctive styles used by effective leaders or good leaders, or leaders that are able to get the job done. What styles, how are they behaving? So you have a task-oriented leader, and they are focused on making sure people and equipment and the other resources that are needed are used in an efficient way so that the group that's involved or the organization as a whole can accomplish the mission, can reach the goals needed. And so with that, there's a focus on planning and clarifying, monitoring, and problem solving. It's going to be it's all about the task, it's checking those boxes. So sometimes it's not the warm fuzzy person, right? This person is very driven on making sure that nothing is left to chance. Everything is done. Everything is accounted for. When you look at the initiating structure leadership, the leader behavior is that it's organizes and defines. It's where you what the employees should be doing to maximize output. It's another one that may not be warm fuzzy necessarily, but how can you get the most out of your employees in the least amount of time, spending the least amount of money? Sometimes that's how it's looked at, right? So how can we get productivity to soar? And you're looking at those various characteristics. And then we have our transactional leaders. And this is very interesting and unique because once again, this person may not give you the warm fuzzies. It's very focused on roles, task requirements, and you are rewarded or punished based on your performance. The interesting thing about it being transactional and the interesting thing about that level of performance outcomes is that it doesn't take in consideration the human element. It doesn't take in consideration that somebody was sick. It doesn't take in consideration that they had a loss in the family. It doesn't take in consideration that people make mistakes. And so, it can be very dry, very clean cut. Here's the rules, and there's no changing the rules. This is the rules. So here's your punishment for your low performance. So that's where that comes into play. Then we have our relationship-oriented leader, and they are really concerned about their interaction with their other coworkers, colleagues, and those that report to them. They really are looking at, consideration and how we can empower you. It's a servant leader. That person is, how can I help you do your job better? How can I be of best service to you so that you're not focused on the irrelevant, you're not focused on the superficial, but you can just be very focused and passionate about the task at hand, about the project, about the mission, about where we're going, the vision for the company, how we can best serve our customers, how you can get the most out of each day. That is what a relationship-oriented leader is about. They are about forming, and they usually have very strong bonds with their coworkers. They will usually know details. People feel like they can open up to them and share with them about what's going on in their life. So they'll know certain things. They'll know about your son's little league game. They'll know about your daughter's soccer game. They'll, know that your daughter wants to, be an engineer. They'll know that your son wants to be a great artist. So they'll take the time to really get to know you and making sure that you are also freed up to have that family kind of interaction, to have a sense of work-life balance, even though we all know that work-life balance is in some ways for most people non-existent. But your relationship-oriented leader is driven to try to help you reach some kind of peace in normalcy. So when you look at the consideration, you're concerned with the needs and desires. You do want that mutual respect and trust. Without it, it's you're doomed to fail. You're looking at how you can empower employees psychologically, right? You can use mind control, right? Um, which means that you're really not, um, it's really not empathetic. It's really not a sense of place of love. It's really a place of you're just trying to be controlling, domineering, and that goes along to that whole narcissistic characteristics that we talked about earlier. This is more along where you're empowering them to believe they actually have control over the work that they do, right? That is the psychological. There's a mental stimulation involved where they truly find value in the work they perform, and they realize that the company, the organization is dependent upon them to get their job done, and that they control the flow of their work. They control when it is done, how it is done, who it is given to, when it is given. So you're empowered by that. You really then see the company as not just being a place where you work, but you see it as being your company. So when we look at our psychological empowerment, it's leading for meaningfulness, right? Which then means you'll get some desirable behaviors. When you're leading for self-determination, the tasks that are being delegated are meaningful. They're not, no one wants to feel like a flunky. No one wants to be the person who runs to get the coffee and donuts every day. That's not meaningful. Mind you, yes, you satisfy people's need for caffeine and sugar, but how is that really, really, truly benefiting the company? How can you put that on a resume? Um, and so that is what people really want to feel. They want to feel self-determined. Leading for competence, supporting and coaching your employees. If you don't have a manager who is very supporting of you, both professionally and personally, um, meaning that they're encouraging and supporting the steps that you make along the way, and they're not coaching you to help you get there, then you're really not leading for competence. And then leading for progress is that you're monitoring your employees, not micromanaging, but you're monitoring them, their progress along the way. Are they meeting those benchmarks? How can you help them? When are you stepping in to check in, to get a pulse check to see how we're doing, how we're faring, or how close are we to meeting the deadline? How can I help you? Do you want me to delegate some of the work, your workload, so that you can focus on these other elements? And then rewarding employees for a job well done. Even if you guys fail, if your team, if that employee gave their all, you saw them putting in the work, you saw them trying to solve those problems, you saw them coming up with new solutions, reward them accordingly. So then we have a participative management, PM, and that's where you involve your employees in helping to set the goals and make various decisions within the organization, solving different problems, and helping making change and helping to get people to embrace that change, where they are really part of, it's really team members. They are really involved. There's an absolute buy-in that this is their company, this is their group, this is their organization. They are not just merely fixtures in it that can be easily replaced. So when you have them sit down at the table and you're not just telling them what the goals are, you're not just telling them what's going to be done, you're actually having them take an active role in getting things done and setting these different goals and benchmarks and helping solve problems. Because anyone can tell you that there's a problem, but can what's some possible solutions? Don't sit down and tell me all the problems. What are the solutions to the problems? And let's work towards solving those problems. And when you're having them involved in all of that, it is so empowering. This is what a relationship-oriented leader is focused on. Servant leadership, as I said already, really it's all about how can I be of best service to you. When people think about servant leaders, the first person that comes to mind is always Jesus Christ, and the fact that he washed his disciples' feet, he washed other people's, he fed other people before feeding himself. things of that nature. And so that's kind of the things that you're putting the followers first before even yourself. So table 14.4 shows the 10 characteristics of servant leaders, and you see that there's a focus on listening, not just hearing. So I'm actually listening, and I'm not listening just to respond or rebuttal, but because I really want to understand what it is that you're saying. Ability to empathize with others' feelings. If you cannot connect with the person's feelings, that their pain, their frustration, their fear, their hope, their excitement, then you can't possibly be a good servant leader. Focus on healing suffering. What that means is that your intent, you're focused, you're driven to help people get past pain, to help people heal through hard times, to help get people back up when they have fallen down. And that's what you really want to do. You want to stop the pain in any way that you can. A self-awareness of strengths and weaknesses. A great servant leader, a person who defines himself as a servant leader, is aware of both their strengths and weaknesses. They're not going to deny, they're not going to play up on their strengths and say, I don't have any weaknesses. And they're also not going to obsess over their weaknesses and then not focus on their strengths. So they're self-aware of both. They are going to use persuasion rather than positional authority to influence others. And what that means is you're not going to just use your title, your job title, and your rank and say, you do so because I'm the boss. No, it's persuasion, it's motivation, it's inspiration. It's finding a way to connect those dots that makes a person want to do the job, want to be better. So here's, as you can see, the other ones as well, and you can read more about that in the text. So here's an example of leaders who work for the lead, and that's, you have Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz was cited as being one of the most foremost practitioners of servant leadership style. You also have Southwest Airlines' servant leaders, Chick-fil-A servant leaders. But right here, let's just focus on Schultz. He made sure his employees had health insurance and worked in a positive environment. And you may say, okay, but there are a lot of companies who they really don't care whether or not you take the health insurance plan, right? They don't try not to even provide you insurance. Some companies will try to find a way to make their people independent contractors, send them that 1099 miscellaneous tax form so they don't have to provide any kind of benefits. So providing health insurance and making sure that employees have the insurance, which means you have to make sure that the insurance is affordable. Because if insurance is, $200 a paycheck, and here a person is, gets $350 a paycheck, guess what? They're not going to get insurance. And then I think most importantly is the positive environment, because I can have health insurance and have a really bad work environment, which will keep me using my health insurance because I'm going to have to constantly go to the doctor. So establishing a positive environment where everyone thrives, everyone's excited to come into work, people come in early, stay late, they're volunteering to take on more shifts, and not just because they need the money, but because they actually like the place where they work. And so because it's that, Schultz has helped build a very strong brand. Then we have our passive leadership. It's a lack of leadership skills, right? And your behavior shows it. You don't want to take responsibility for leading. When things go wrong, you blame the team members. You're rarely around. You barely come and check on the team. You're not walking the floors to make sure that everyone is good and make sure someone has help. You just kind of just lay back, and that's the laissez-faire leadership approach. Just, hey, whatever, it is what it is. I'm here for a check. So there's some implications to these behavioral approaches, and that the leader's behavior is more important than their traits, right? Their behavior is more important than their traits. Because you can list all these various characteristics, but what do I do? How am I treating people? That is what some people think is more important. Because I may have these great traits, but then I turn around and I bully you like crazy, you know. And then the second implication is that there's no one best style. You may blend, you may use one style for one group of people, another style for another group. You may use one style during one project, another style. You may blend them. You may create your own little cluster of 3 different styles that you work with. I am a cluster of, transformational and servant leader. Um, and and so but then I may have to blend more task oriented or transactional depending on the client environment that I'm working in, because that may be more along their culture, and me coming in with a servant leadership approach may actually have me more dealing with more resistance to change, or people putting up more barriers because they're unfamiliar with that kind of approach. So there's no one best style. You just get in where you fit in, and you make it work. What I will always say is that everything should have a dignity-rich approach. Remembering that on the other side of every phone call, every email, every text, every instant message, every tweet, every post, every conversation, that there is a human being on the other side. There is a heartbeat on the other side. That there is someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's father, someone's mother. And if we approach people that way, we'll have less conflict, less turmoil, less issues, less disengaged workers in the workplace. So we have a contingency leadership model that says that you determine a leader style is whether it's task oriented or relationship oriented, and if that style is effective for the situation at hand. As I mentioned earlier, there's times where you may have to be more task oriented based on the project or the environment in which you work, or based on certain parameters that were set up. There's other times where you have to be, or you can be, or it's encouraged to be more relationship oriented. Is determined based on the circumstances and environment that you're in. Then we have various dimensions of situational control, and we're going to look at these 3 right here. We have a leader-member relations, a task structure, and position power. And the leader-member relations reflects the extent to which the leader has loyalty and trust and support of the group that they're leading. That says a lot. If you have low support, if your people are not loyal to you, if they don't trust you, then your relation with those members is very weak and very low. It'll reflect accordingly. And depending on your leadership style, you may throw them under the bus, and when things go wrong, are quick to try to demote, fire, or punish them in some other way. Which oftentimes will lead to your demotion, termination, or punishment. Then when we look at task structure, it's the extent to which tasks are routine and easily understood. The routine tasks are what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, right? And you have a natural ebb and flow, and it's easily understood, meaning that when the task is explained to a person, that person should be able to explain that task inside and out to anyone else in the company or outside of the company clearly, and so on and so forth. Should just be like that when you were in school, early on in grade school, and they'd have you sit in chairs, and then one person would whisper something in the one classmate's ear, and then the message is gone from one student to the next. And when it gets to the last student, the teacher says, now tell me what it was that you heard. And whether or not what you heard was what the teacher told the first student is key. And it's all about the communication. Well, it's the same thing with the task. How easily understood the task is means that person should not only be able to relay it, but they should be able to perform it. And so should everyone else the same way. So it's the same kind of concept. Then when we talk about position power, it refers to how much power you have to make assignments for others and to reward and punish other people. And I'm a stickler for titles and and things like that, because people get a title and then they feel like somehow they're like some kind of god, or something. Um, it goes to your head, and you end up saying and doing some of the most ignorant things, um, and it can negatively impact the environment and culture of an organization. So position power um, is something that you have to always take in consideration with your situational control. Then moving right along, Rayford is head of task force consisting of his peers from other departments in the organization. So he has, is it A, high leader-member relations, B, high task structure, C, high position power, or D, low position power? He is a head of a task force that consists of his peers from other departments in the organization. Which of these four? If you said D, you are correct. Low position power. Remember, this has nothing to do with member relations between you and your subordinates. This has nothing to do with any kind of task structure. He definitely does not have high position power because he's just the head of a task force with his other peers. So it's low position power. And figure 14.1 shows you Fiedler's contingency model that I talked about earlier, and you see the optimal leadership style, the task-motivated leadership, relationship-motivated leadership, and then the task-motivated leadership. And it shows over here high situational control, high control situations, moderate control situations, low control situations, and you can see the correlation. And and read more about that, of course, in the textbook, please. Path Goal Leadership Model. It basically states that effective leaders make themselves available, make available various rewards that are desired by those that report to them. And it increases motivation because the paths and the desired behavior are clearly outlined, and it helps people be able to reach those goals. And while they're reaching those goals, they're provided support from that leader, from that structure. And so when I have a clear path and I know what the goals are that lay ahead of me on that path, then I'm focused. I'm driven. And especially if I have the support and motivation from the leader, I'm going to go full steam ahead on that path. Figure 14.2 shows House's revised path goal theory. So he revises the theory and believes that leader behaviors are influenced by two contingency factors of the characteristics of employees and the environment in which we work. And in determining that by using these two contingencies, that's when you determine the most effective leadership style to use. So you'll see the four bubbles, and you have the leader behaviors, right? The path goal clarifying, value based, and you see the employee characteristics, their ability to handle tasks, what experience they have, the environmental factors, what the work group dynamics are, leadership effectiveness, whether or not the leader is accepted and whether or not the leader accepts the group, employee motivation and how satisfied employees are, how well employees perform, all of those. So you see how the leader behaviors, once you include the employee characteristics and the environmental factors, how that then impacts the effectiveness of the leader. So that's how House revised that. So please read more on that revised theory. Then we look at the leadership styles of that, and you can see table 14.5 goes into the style of the leader behavior, and you can see the descriptions of behavior toward employees. So for instance, if you see supportive, quote, I want things to be pleasant since everyone's about equal here. So then at that point, the behavior towards employees would be that you would treat them as equals, show concern for well-being and needs, be friendly and approachable. So that's just one way in which those are outlined. So does it really work? Does this revised, theory work? Where you use more than one leadership style, you help employees achieve their goals, you modify your style to fit the employee and task characteristics. You could say yes, right? Because if you just used your one leadership style and you used it to try to motivate and inspire each employee the same way, you use that same one, it's not going to work because every person has a different personality and people are motivated in different ways, and you have to communicate to people in different ways, and people have different cultures and different beliefs and different customs, and you have people that are not all naturally normally and originally born here. They may be from another country, so the way they communicate is in a different way, and how they see the structure, leadership, and organization could be in a different lens. And so if you can find a way to modify yourself, to realize that everyone's coming from different ways of life and different ways of doing things, and you have older generations and younger generations, you have a tech generation, you have a paper and pencil generation, and you have all these different dynamics. To be able to modify your leadership style says a great deal about you as a leader. I have big issues with people who refuse to modify themselves for their employees. The way they look at it is their employees should modify themselves for them, and I just feel that that's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. That's where you start getting the distrust and the employee buy-in, and you have increased disengagement. You start getting absenteeism and turnovers, and employees start to resent you and start writing up all kinds of crazy reviews about you on these different sites. So it can very well work, depending on the leader, depending on the environment, depending on how well you implement it. So there's a full range model, and that's the transformational leadership style, and that's where you're really working with the person, not the task, not the environment, it's really working one-on-one and with your groups to help transform these people to really be a part of and embedded in the culture of an organization, so that they are actually very focused and driven and passionate and excited about reaching organizational goals over their own self-interest. You have some employees who come to work, they just want to check. Well, that's your self-interest. You want to check to pay your bills, but you're not really passionate about the mission and vision of the organization. You're really not passionate about helping the organization reach its goals. But a transformational leader is effective more times than not of being able to help transform that employee to look beyond their self-interest and to actually look towards organizational goal. And this is influenced by individual characteristics and, of course, as I've said plenty of times, organizational culture. And where does the culture, how is it started? Where is it rooted? Where does it get its energy from? It gets its energy from the top, so from the CEO. So if the CEO is a jerk, that culture, that energy spreads throughout, and it's very difficult, if not impossible, to unravel, rewire that kind of culture. You can come in and be just, peaches and cream, rosy, and be in that negative environment in no time. And if it doesn't drain you and you leave, it'll drain you and you'll be just like everyone else, miserable. So Jill's a manager, and I mean Jim is a manager, and he uses rewards and discipline to motivate his team members, those that report up to him. Um, he does this as a way of helping them reach their full potential. Is this called contingent leadership, transformational leadership, developmental consideration, or democratic leadership? Jim is into using rewards and discipline to motivate his team members, but he does it to help them reach their full potential. Which of these responses, these answers, is the correct one? If you said B, you are correct. Transformational. With all things, there's rewards and discipline, right? In the family home, there's rewards and discipline. You do something wrong, and the thing is that one thing about a transformational leader, for the most part, and really any really good leader, you don't punish just because someone made a mistake. You look at intent. You look at, was someone just being careless and reckless? Did someone do it intentionally? Did they intend to derail the project? Things of that nature. Did you intend to not come into work knowing that we had to present this proposal to the client? So different things of that nature that you have to take in consideration. Don't just punish just because you can. So some key behaviors that have been outlined or identified for transformational leaders are very charismatic. There's an interpersonal attraction that inspires acceptance and support. Some charismatic leaders have been, Dr. Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa also falls into servant leadership as well. But they are inspiring, they are motivating, they are idealized. They take in consideration each individual, and they are intellectually stimulated, and they intellectually stimulate others. So some various implications that can be taken into consideration is that it can improve the results for both individuals and groups, right? So it's not just a group dynamic, but it's also each individual that makes up a group. And it could be used to train employees at any level. So from the C-suite, which are all your C leaders that have a C behind their name, CEO, COO, CIO, CTO, CMO, all the way down to your frontline employees. Those are your entry-level employees. It could be used to train any. It does, however, require ethical leaders. You cannot be an unethical leader and be a transformational leader. It's eventually you're going to go down a slippery slope. It's just not possible to be ethical and transformational. So there's some ethical things that top managers should do to be effective transformational leaders. Employ a code of conduct, or code of ethics, excuse me. Not only employ the code of ethics, but you have to reinforce it. And you have to make sure that it's clearly defined and everyone understands what it means. There's no gray, it's very clear. Choose the right people. So it's about recruiting, selecting, promoting people who display ethical behavior, and weeding out people that don't. If you can't get them to get on the right foot, get them out the door. Making performance expectations reflect how employees are treated, right? And so the correlation between the two is significant. Emphasizing the value of diversity, training employees to value diversity, and diversity in all ways, not just sexually, not just with race, not with gender, but also considering diversity with age and religion, making sure that you have people with military backgrounds and people that speak multiple languages, and people in different social economic backgrounds, people where you have a sampling of the entire world, basically, in your organization as much as possible, right? Where you want to make sure you get the best of the best, and the best of the best reflects every human being. Making sure that you're not discriminating against the person with any kind of physical, mental, um, visual, or auditory limitations, restrictions, or things of that nature. So making sure there's a lot of diversity. Rewarding high moral conduct, so that you're identifying, rewarding, and publicly praising employees who exemplify high moral conduct. What happens is when you go about this, you reinforce it, which then encourages other people to also be morally grounded and driven. So we talked earlier about the leader member exchange, and that's where you're going to emphasize where leaders have different sorts of relationships with different employees that report up to them. And as I mentioned earlier, it's natural. You should. You'll connect with different people in different ways. You may like baseball and you find out that Joe and Susan like baseball as well. Then you connect with them on that regard. You like pasta and so does Keisha. Well, you guys may talk about that. You may both be left handed as well. Um, you may be soft spoken, and so is Michael, or whatever. It's connecting with people in different ways and leading them accordingly, because you've made a concerted effort to connect with the human being um, on the other side of that conversation. All right. So everything is different. And so at that point, there's really no favorites because everyone in their own way is a favorite, or they have a unique relationship with you. It does not mean that you're going to be friends with or close with or have a great rapport with each member of your team. But what it does mean is that you have a unique relationship with each one. And one person may be an absolute jerk, but you have found a way to communicate with them in a way that they still are able to maintain their dignity, and you're working to make sure that they allow others to maintain theirs, because you never know why that person is being a jerk. They may be going through something in their personal lives that they're just not sharing. So there's everything is taken into consideration, but this is very interesting, is that knowing that you can have these unique relationships. The key is to making sure that you never cross the line. And crossing the line means is that if your mother, father, wife, husband um, would not approve of how you engage in conversation with this person, then you've crossed the line. If you would not want it put out on social media, if you would not want someone to record your interaction with that person or persons and put it on the company website, then you've clearly crossed the line. So it's really key that when we talk about these different sorts of relationships, that they are ethical and moral and respectful and dignity rich, right? We're not saying that anything could be possibly perceived as being inappropriate. So I just want to make sure I stress that. E-leadership, as I mentioned earlier, is being able to interact with one or more people using technology. So here's a question for you, and this we will actually wrap up this presentation. Laura is involved in leading a virtual team with members in Kansas, South Carolina, Chicago, and India. And this is an example of what? Servant leadership, shared leadership, leader member exchange, e-leadership. I think you kind of get this one, right? Because it was on the previous slide. It's D, e-leadership. So with that, if you guys have any questions, you know how to reach me. And make sure you take great notes. This is a chapter that I like to be able to implement in quizzes and exams, as well as you'll see a draw in with our assignments. All right. Have a great day, everyone.